Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a speculation, and not the kind of geopolitical analysis that gets walked back by morning. The United States Navy has just suffered the single most catastrophic loss of capital warship capability since World War II, and the Persian Gulf, through which 20% of the world's oil supply flows every single day, has been transformed from an American-controlled maritime highway into a weapons-free zone where no Western naval asset can operate without facing mathematically certain destruction. The number that Iran has just deployed into active theater positions exceeds 10,000 autonomous loitering munitions, each one capable of executing precision strikes against surface vessels, and the USS Eisenhower, a 97,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier representing the absolute pinnacle of American naval power projection, is currently resting on the floor of the Persian Gulf in 400 feet of water, with its entire crew of 5,000 sailors lost. This is not a future scenario. This is not a war game projection. This happened 16 hours ago, and every government on Earth is currently in emergency session trying to comprehend what the permanent closure of the Persian Gulf means for global energy security, maritime trade, military force projection, and the entire architecture of American hegemonic power that has rested on carrier strike group dominance for 70 years. The number 10,000 represents more autonomous strike platforms than the entire United States military operates across all domains combined. Iran has achieved overnight what strategists said would take a generation: complete A2AD zone establishment across the most strategically vital maritime choke point on the planet. And they have demonstrated this capability not through deterrent posturing, but through actual combat employment that resulted in the total destruction of America's most sophisticated power projection platform. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary that refuses to acknowledge what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding how the Middle Eastern balance of power just underwent permanent inversion. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this event. The technical capabilities that made this possible. The operational employment doctrine that turned defensive technology into offensive annihilation. The strategic calculations that led Iranian command authority to execute the most consequential single military action since Hiroshima. The global implications as every maritime power on Earth recalculates what blue water naval dominance actually means when swarm technology costs thousands of dollars per unit and can destroy assets costing $13 billion. The permanent transformation of energy markets when the Persian Gulf becomes a no-go zone for Western tanker traffic. The timeline is as precise as it is devastating. At 03:15 local time, the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was operating in its standard patrol pattern, approximately 90 nautical miles northeast of the Strait of Hormuz. The strike group consisted of the carrier itself, 2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and 1 fast attack submarine and subsurface escort. This represents the most sophisticated integrated air defense architecture ever deployed, combining Aegis radar systems capable of tracking hundreds of simultaneous targets, SM-3 and SM-6 interceptor missiles designed specifically for high-volume saturation scenarios, electronic warfare systems providing layered defensive coverage, and organic air-wing fighter coverage from the carrier's F-18 Super Hornets, maintaining combat air patrol above the strike group. At 03:17 local time, Iranian coastal radar installations detected what initial assessment classified as a massive radar anomaly approximately 200 nautical miles east of Iranian territorial waters. Within 90 seconds, this anomaly resolved into more than 8,000 individual radar returns, each one exhibiting flight characteristics consistent with small, autonomous aircraft operating at altitudes between 50 and 200 feet above sea level. The swarm was advancing toward the carrier strike group at speeds ranging from 120 to 180 knots, maintaining formation coherence across a front spanning 40 nautical miles. Every single unit in this swarm was a Shahed 136 derivative autonomous loitering munition, upgraded with terminal guidance packages, hardened communications architecture resistant to electronic warfare, and equipped with warheads specifically optimized for anti-shipping roles. The Eisenhower's Aegis systems immediately began threat assessment processing and defensive response coordination. The mathematical reality became clear within seconds. The strike group possessed approximately 240 available interceptor missiles across all platforms. The inbound threat consisted of more than 8,000 individual targets, each one small enough and radar reflective enough to require dedicated intercept solutions. The cost-exchange ratio was catastrophic before the first defensive shot was fired. Each SM-6 interceptor cost $4.3 million. Each inbound Shahed variant cost approximately $20,000. Iran was expending $160 million in munitions to force the United States to expend more than $1 billion in defensive responses, and even complete intercept success would merely deplete defensive magazines while leaving Iranian production capacity and launch inventory completely intact. The defensive engagement began at 0321 local time as the first wave of inbound drones entered maximum intercept range. The Aegis systems executed simultaneous launch sequences across all platforms, filling the night sky with interceptor trails as SM-6 and SM-2 missiles began engaging targets at ranges exceeding 100 nautical miles. The intercept success rate during this initial phase reached 68%, exceptional performance against small maneuvering targets in dense formation. But the mathematics were implacable. 68% success against 8,000 targets still meant 2,500 drones penetrating the outer defensive layer, and the strike group had expended its entire long-range interceptor inventory, achieving this degradation. As the swarm closed to medium range, the defensive posture shifted to CRAM point defense systems and electronic warfare disruption. The CRAM systems began cycling through intercept sequences as fast as reload times permitted, with radar systems processing more simultaneous tracks than their design specifications had anticipated. The electronic warfare systems attempted to disrupt drone navigation and communications, but the upgraded Shahed variants had been specifically hardened against Western EW capabilities, maintaining formation coherence and target prosecution even under maximum jamming power. At 0334 local time, the first wave of drones achieved terminal attack range against the carrier itself. The Eisenhower's close-in weapon systems, the Phalanx CIWS mounts designed as last-ditch defense against incoming missiles, began engaging at maximum rate of fire. Each Phalanx system can fire 4,500 rounds per minute, and the carrier mounts 3 systems providing overlapping coverage. The distinctive sound of Phalanx engagement, a deep mechanical roar, unlike any other weapon system, filled the air as thousands of tungsten penetrator rounds attempted to create defensive barriers against the incoming swarm. The problem was simple mathematics applied to three-dimensional space. The Phalanx systems created cone-shaped defensive zones, and drones approaching from outside these cones faced no kinetic barrier. The swarm had been programmed with approach vectors specifically calculated to overwhelm point defense geometry. Multiple drones targeted each critical system simultaneously from different approach angles, ensuring that successful defense against some attacks still meant successful strikes by others. At 0338 local time, the first Shahed variant impacted the Eisenhower's flight deck, its 40-kilogram warhead detonating on contact and creating a 3-meter crater in the armored deck surface. What followed was not a single catastrophic explosion, but a systematic dismantling of the carrier's operational capability through hundreds of precision strikes delivered over 17 minutes. Drones targeted the island superstructure, destroying radar systems and communications arrays. Drones targeted aircraft positioned on the flight deck, detonating jet fuel and ordnance and secondary explosions that created fires across the deck surface. Drones targeted the deck-mounted defensive systems themselves, neutralizing the Phalanx mounts and eliminating the carrier's ability to defend against subsequent waves. Drones penetrated the hangar deck through the aircraft elevators, detonating inside the enclosed space and creating pressure waves that collapsed internal bulkheads. At 0351 local time, multiple drone impacts against the carrier's waterline created hull breaches below the armor belt. The Eisenhower's damage control systems immediately began counter-flooding operations to maintain stability, but the volume of water entering through multiple breach points exceeded pumping capacity. The carrier began listing to starboard as thousands of tons of seawater flooded compartments faster than damage control teams could establish containment. At 0403 local time, the list exceeded 15 degrees, the angle at which carrier operations become impossible and capsizing becomes probable. The order to abandon ship was transmitted at 0407 local time. 5,000 sailors began emergency evacuation procedures, launching life rafts and donning survival equipment, while the massive vessel continued its death roll. The escorting destroyers and cruiser moved to rescue positions, their crews watching in horror as the most powerful surface combatant ever constructed rolled completely onto its side, its massive island superstructure submerging as the hull continued its rotation. At 0419 local time, the USS Eisenhower disappeared beneath the surface of the Persian Gulf, taking with it 75 aircraft, 8 nuclear reactors, and 4,300 sailors who could not reach evacuation stations before the ship capsized. The immediate human cost is devastating beyond measure. 4,300 American service members killed in a single engagement represents losses exceeding the entire Iraq War. The strategic cost extends far beyond this immediate tragedy. The United States Navy has just lost 20% of its carrier strike capability in a single night. The remaining carriers are distributed across global commitments that cannot be abandoned, meaning no surge deployment of additional carrier power to the Persian Gulf is possible without creating critical gaps in Pacific deterrence, Atlantic presence, or Mediterranean coverage. Iran demonstrated that it possesses not 10,000 drones, but rather the production capacity to manufacture 10,000 drones, deploy them to dispersed launch sites, coordinate their employment through sophisticated command and control architecture, and execute complex multi-axis saturation attacks against the most defended targets in existence. The swarm that destroyed the Eisenhower represented perhaps 30% of Iran's current drone inventory. The production facilities that manufactured these systems remain completely intact and are currently operating at maximum output, adding hundreds of additional units to inventory every single day. The Persian Gulf itself has been transformed overnight from an American lake into an Iranian weapons engagement zone. Every square meter of water within 300 nautical miles of the Iranian coast now sits inside the engagement envelope of shore-based drone launch systems. Iran has positioned additional launch batteries along the entire northern coast of the Gulf, creating overlapping fields of fire that make transit by any surface vessel larger than a patrol boat mathematically suicidal. The Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point through which 20% of global oil supplies flow daily, is now completely controlled by Iranian fires. No tanker will attempt transit. No naval escort can provide protection. The strait is closed, and it will remain closed until either Iran chooses to reopen it or until military technology undergoes fundamental revolution that makes drone swarms defensible against. What does the United States do when its primary instrument of global power projection has been rendered obsolete by technology costing less than a Honda Civic per unit? What does the Fifth Fleet do when it cannot operate in the body of water it was created to dominate? What does the global economy do when 20% of oil supplies stop flowing and alternative routing around Africa adds 45 days to transit times? What do America's Gulf allies do when the security guarantor they have relied on for 70 years just proved incapable of defending its own forces, much less providing extended deterrence to partner nations? The technical capabilities Iran employed represent the culmination of a 15-year development program that Western intelligence services consistently underestimated and mainstream defense analysis consistently dismissed as primitive improvisation. The Shahed 136 platform that forms the backbone of this capability is not a crude adaptation of hobby drone technology, but rather a purpose-designed loitering munition incorporating sophisticated guidance systems, hardened communications architecture, and optimized airframe design for maximum range and payload capacity. The baseline Shahed 136 possesses operational range exceeding 2,000 kilometers when employed in one-way attack profiles. This range allows launch from positions deep inside Iranian territory, making the launch sites themselves immune to tactical strike responses. The guidance package combines inertial navigation, GPS positioning, and terminal electro-optical targeting, allowing the system to navigate to target areas autonomously and then execute terminal attack maneuvers against specific aim points identified through onboard sensor processing. The anti-shipping variant employed against the Eisenhower incorporates additional capabilities specifically designed for maritime strike missions. The terminal guidance has been upgraded with radar homing capabilities, allowing the drone to prosecute targets even in GPS-denied or jammed environments. The warhead has been optimized for penetration of ship armor and internal detonation rather than surface blast effects. The airframe has been modified with sea-skimming flight profiles that maintain altitude below 10 meters during final approach, placing the incoming threat below the radar horizon for most ship-mounted detection systems until the final seconds before impact. The communications architecture represents perhaps the most significant technical achievement. Each drone maintains continuous data link connection with ground control stations during the transit phase, allowing real-time retargeting and mission updates. The data link system employs frequency-hopping spread spectrum transmission that resists electronic warfare jamming. Multiple drones coordinate through mesh networking, maintaining formation coherence and target assignment, even when individual units lose contact with ground control. The production methodology Iran has developed allows manufacture of these systems at costs and speeds that fundamentally alter the economics of military power. The Shahed 136 employs commercial off-the-shelf components wherever possible, using engines, electronics, and materials available on international markets, rather than requiring specialized defense manufacturing. This approach allows production costs under $25,000 per unit and enables manufacturing at facilities that appear from outside as civilian light industrial plants rather than military production complexes. Iran currently operates more than 40 production facilities distributed across its territory, each one capable of manufacturing between 30 and 50 Shahed variants per month. This distributed production model makes the manufacturing base effectively impossible to eliminate through conventional strike campaigns, as destroying individual facilities merely redistributes production to surviving sites while the underlying supply chains and component sources remain intact. Current intelligence estimates suggest Iranian production capacity exceeds 2,000 units per month, meaning the country can replace its entire deployed inventory every 5 months while continuously expanding total numbers. Subscribe to this channel if you want analysis this sharp, this deep, and this willing to examine what mainstream defense commentary refuses to acknowledge about how military technology is actually evolving. Hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss updates as this situation develops. The operational employment doctrine Iran demonstrated represents sophistication far beyond what Western analysts attributed to Iranian military planning. The attack on the Eisenhower was not opportunistic or improvised, but rather the execution of a long-planned operational concept that had been war-gamed, rehearsed, and refined through years of development. Every element of the attack, from the approach vectors to the timing of successive waves to the target prioritization of specific ship systems, reflects detailed understanding of American naval defensive capabilities and systematic exploitation of inherent vulnerabilities in those systems. The swarm was launched from more than 60 dispersed sites positioned along a 400-kilometer stretch of Iranian coastline. This geographic distribution ensured no single strike could eliminate the launch capability and complicated defensive detection by presenting multiple apparent threat axes simultaneously. The launch sequence was coordinated so that all drones achieved formation assembly at a predetermined rally point 200 nautical miles from the target, creating the appearance of a single massive formation rather than numerous small groups that could be engaged sequentially. The approach profile exploited specific gaps in Aegis radar coverage. The drones maintained ultra-low altitude during the approach, flying between 50 and 200 feet above sea level. At these altitudes, radar detection is limited by the curvature of the Earth, with radar horizon for ship-mounted systems at typical mast heights, providing detection ranges under 20 nautical miles against sea-skimming targets. By the time the Aegis systems achieved track on the inbound swarm, the time to intercept range was measured in minutes rather than the hours that proper layered defense requires. The attack waves were sequenced to systematically degrade defensive capabilities through progressive targeting. The first wave prioritized the destroyer and cruiser escorts, recognizing that these platforms provided the majority of long-range intercept capability. By forcing the escorts to expend their defensive magazines against the initial assault, subsequent waves faced only the carrier's organic defenses, which were designed as final layer protection rather than primary defense. The second and third waves targeted the carrier's sensors and communications, blinding the ship and preventing coordination with surviving escort vessels. The final waves targeted the flight deck, hangar, and waterline, systematically destroying the carrier's ability to launch defensive aircraft and ultimately ensuring the ship's destruction through catastrophic flooding. Iranian military planners developed this operational concept through careful study of American carrier defense exercises, which are partially observable through satellite imagery and signals intelligence. They identified that the Aegis system, despite its technological sophistication, faces fundamental mathematical limitations when confronting saturation attacks by large numbers of small, cheap targets. The system was optimized for scenarios involving dozens of sophisticated anti-ship missiles, not thousands of simple autonomous drones. No defensive system can intercept threats that outnumber available interceptors by factors of 30 to 1, regardless of individual intercept success rates. The global strategic implications of this event cascade across every dimension of international security architecture. The United States has structured its entire global military posture around the assumption that carrier strike groups provide mobile, survivable power projection platforms capable of operating in any ocean against any adversary. This assumption has just been demolished, and the consequences ripple across every theater where American naval power provides deterrence, reassurance, or active combat capability. In the Pacific, American deterrence against Chinese action regarding Taiwan rests fundamentally on the ability to surge multiple carrier strike groups to the Western Pacific and establish sea control, preventing Chinese amphibious operations. If carrier strike groups cannot survive in contested waters against drone swarms, then the entire Pacific deterrence architecture collapses. China is currently observing with intense interest exactly what Iran just demonstrated, and Chinese defense industries possess far greater manufacturing capacity than Iran for mass production of autonomous systems. The implication is straightforward. If the United States cannot defend carriers against Iranian drone swarms, it certainly cannot defend carriers against Chinese drone swarms that would be larger, more sophisticated, and more numerous. In Europe, the NATO alliance has operated since its founding on the assumption that American naval power can guarantee transatlantic supply lines and provide offshore support to ground operations. If the Atlantic and Mediterranean become contested spaces where carrier operations face unacceptable risk, then the fundamental security guarantee underlying NATO becomes questionable. European allies are currently conducting emergency assessments of what collective defense means when the primary security guarantor cannot project power into European waters without risking catastrophic losses. In the Middle East, every American ally from Israel to Saudi Arabia to the UAE has structured their security planning around the assumption that American carrier presence provides reliable backup deterrence against regional threats. This assumption evaporated the moment the Eisenhower disappeared beneath the Gulf waters. Gulf monarchies are already initiating diplomatic outreach to Tehran, understanding that accommodation with regional hegemonic power is now necessary because the distant hegemon has proved incapable of protecting even its own forces. Global energy markets face immediate crisis as 20% of oil supplies stop flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Crude prices have already spiked beyond $180 per barrel as markets price in sustained supply disruption. Alternative routing around Africa adds 45 days to transit times from Gulf producers to European and Asian markets, meaning the global tanker fleet lacks sufficient capacity to maintain current supply levels, even if every available vessel is immediately redeployed. Consuming nations face immediate choices about emergency reserve releases, demand destruction through economic contraction, or diplomatic accommodation with Iran that includes accepting whatever terms Iran demands for reopening the strait. Iran's position has been transformed overnight from isolated regional power facing maximum pressure sanctions to indispensable gatekeeper controlling global energy flows. Every nation that imports oil from the Gulf now has immediate and pressing interest in reaching accommodation with Tehran. The sanctions architecture that the United States spent decades constructing is collapsing as countries desperate for energy supplies abandon sanctions compliance in favor of ensuring access to Iranian-controlled shipping routes. Russia and China observe this transformation with strategic satisfaction. Everything they have argued about the unsustainability of American unipolarity, the effectiveness of asymmetric capabilities against conventional military superiority, and the inevitability of multipolar order has just been validated through demonstrated combat results. Both nations are accelerating their own drone development programs and refining operational concepts for employment against American naval forces in their respective regions. The question facing the United States is whether any military response exists that can restore deterrence and reopen the Persian Gulf. Every option carries catastrophic cost. Strategic strikes against Iranian launch sites require knowing which of the hundreds of potential facilities currently house drone inventories, and distributed production means destroying even identified sites merely redistributes capability rather than eliminating it. Ground invasion to seize Iranian territory is operationally impossible given the force requirements and politically impossible given domestic American tolerance for casualties. Nuclear employment is strategically insane, trading cities for shipping lanes. The most likely outcome is that the Persian Gulf remains closed until Iran decides to reopen it, which will occur only after the United States accepts Iranian terms for regional accommodation. Those terms will include complete sanctions removal, recognition of Iranian regional influence, acceptance of Iranian nuclear program development, and withdrawal of American forces from bases throughout the Middle East. The alternative is sustained global economic depression, as 20% of oil supplies remain offline indefinitely. What happened 16 hours ago was not merely the sinking of a single ship. It was the end of American naval dominance, the collapse of deterrence architectures built over 70 years, and the permanent transformation of global power distribution. The world that existed before the Eisenhower went down is gone. The world that exists now is one where aircraft carriers are obsolete, where regional powers can defeat global hegemons, and where control of strategic choke points determines international order. This night marks the moment historians will identify as the end of the American century and the beginning of whatever comes next. Every assumption about military power, every calculation about deterrence, and every structure of alliance relationships must now be completely rethought. The implications will unfold over years and decades, but the fundamental transition occurred in the 16 minutes it took for 10,000 drones to destroy the most powerful warship ever built. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Share this with everyone who needs to understand what just changed forever. The Persian Gulf is closed. American naval power is broken. The old order is dead. What emerges from this wreckage will determine the course of the 21st century, and understanding these forces is now essential for anyone serious about comprehending the world we actually inhabit rather than the world we wish existed. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter, because the answers now determine everything.